Welcome, everybody, to another episode of CPAC Now, America UnCanceled. I'm Matt Schlapp, along with
Mercy Schlapp. It's great to be back with you all as we're in full recovery from CPAC Dallas, right, Matt?
I'm fully recovered, and we're ready to get out there and start pushing with some of these terrible things that are occurring across the country and really our region of the globe.
That's right. And we've been following this developing story. As you all know, it's a very important issue to us and our family, this developing story in Cuba. And really, we have, I think, one of the best people who has been out front and center talking about the atrocities of Cuba, joining us on the show. Senator Marco Rubio from the great state, I literally would say the greatest state in the United States, my home state of Florida. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. And I agree 100% about that last statement there.
It's not really a state. I keep saying Florida and Texas and maybe even Tennessee, they're becoming like these mega states where like all the action is. And I can't think of a better state than Florida for that to be happening in. Yeah,
I'm trying to convince the Kansan to move over there. But let's get to the story on what's happening in Cuba. Last week, what we witnessed, especially on social media, was something that we hadn't seen in decades. The Cuban people coming out, fighting for freedom, speaking up against the Cuban communist regime. Senator, what are the updates? Because it looks like things have quieted down on the island.
Well, I would, it's first of all, I think that we have to understand Cuba is basically under martial law. I mean, especially in key cities like Havana, there are openly deployed security forces. They have these special forces that they like to think of them as Navy SEALs, or but really no one's gonna. I mean, they don't fight any wars at this point. They're there for one purpose, and that's to come out and repress people. They call them the Black Wasps, and they've been deployed for the first time really ever that we've ever seen them in the streets of Cuba, certainly in 20 years. And so they're out there and intimidating people. And then remember, there is not consistent internet access. So some of the images, we continue to get images out of Cuba. The problem is we don't know if they happened today, yesterday, or they're from last Sunday or from some other point in time. But the factors that led to the 11th of July events have not gone away. And it's important to remember how that started. That started because someone in one city broadcast on Facebook Live a protest, and it ended up throughout the day spreading to over 50 cities across the island. Totally unprecedented. And all the reasons why people, at the end of the day, they're upset. It's not about, yes, they don't have COVID vaccines, people are dying, yes, they're hungry, yes, their homes are crumbling. All of that is true, and I don't mean to diminish any of it. But what's really at play here is they don't have the liberty to do anything about it. They can't say anything about it. They can't elect new leaders. They can't go out and start their own business. They can't go out there and work with their own hands to sort of improve their lives. They have no liberty to do any of these things, which is why the call on the street was for liberty. That's what this is about. And that desire for liberty is only growing. It's not diminishing.
So, the left in this country immediately blames the embargo, the fact that the Cuban people don't have things like vaccines and other daily staples because the mean American government won't allow, a trade relationship with the people on the island. Why does the left have this exactly wrong?
Well, first of all, they're either misinformed or they're liars. Whoever says that this is because of the embargo is either a liar or they're just misinformed and they're just parroting some talking point. Because for them, it's natural to say whatever's going on bad in the world, it's America's fault. America did something to cause this. Cuba trades with every country in the world, including the United States, by the way. They buy 66% of their chicken, which is the top protein that people eat in Cuba. 66% of it comes from the United States. Half their soybeans comes from the United States. There is no embargo against food and medicine. In fact, you can donate as much as you want. In fact, the embargo against food and medicine was a Cuban embargo. They themselves would not allow food and medicine to be brought into. They put limits on it. They prohibited it. Then they wanted to charge tariffs. They announced last week after the protest, we're lifting the ban on the importation of food and medicine until December, admitting that they themselves had created this blockade. There's no embargo on the Cuban people. If a Cuban opens a private business, we can do all the trade in the world with that person. You can travel and stay at that hotel. You can eat at that restaurant. The only embargo is against companies owned by the regime. It's the regime that's decided to allow the military to own everything in Cuba. If they open it up to the Cuban people, there would be no embargo. So that's what people don't tell you, because either they're misinformed or they're just flat out liars.
So when you say that, Senator, Black Lives Matter, we call it Black Lives Matter Incorporated. They came out in the last few days and basically sided with the regime and said that the problem on the island is this policy, this Trump policy, this Bush policy of the embargo. Would your criticism extend to Black Lives Matter for their characterization of what's happening in Cuba?
That Black Lives Matter Foundation that put that out is a total, complete scam. Now, they're founded by Marxists who, by the way, have raised millions of dollars by shaking down corporations. There are corporations in America that wrote them checks for millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars.
The lady who founded it went out and bought herself a mansion. So they're complete scam artists and they're complete frauds. But on top of everything else, what I said last week, my office still stands. My office stands ready with my staff to help every single one of them in their immigration to Cuba. Since it's such a paradise, I stand ready to help them to do everything we can to help facilitate that for them. But I think what's more indicative is that the number of people on the left that didn't say a word about it, they didn't criticize them, they didn't distance themselves from it. They probably don't agree with them, but at least what they said at the depths of it, but they're afraid of them. They won't say anything about them because at the end of the day, look, to be fair, Bob Menendez, Democrat, great ally on the issue of a free Cuba. Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Florida. We don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but on Cuba, she's excellent. She does a great job. It always has been for more than 20 years. But there is a very active, vibrant base of the Democratic Party, which is their activist base. A lot of these $50 checks that they raise on the internet that are radical, left-wing, anti-American crazies. And the Democrats are afraid to confront them and take them on. And so they either say nothing or they go along with them when they say these crazy things.
Yeah, I think watching the rise of the leftist here in America, and we saw just this past weekend, it was on CNN that it was a Washington Post reporter saying, well, yeah, the Democrats actually, some of them do agree with Cuba's socialism. How difficult is it for you to, have to deal with some of these Democrat, congressional colleagues that very much support the Cuban regime?
Well, I mean, look, it's distasteful, right? Because you know the truth and you just can't fathom how they come around. But I just remind myself that's the price of freedom and liberty. When you're in a free country, people have a right to be crazy. People have a right to believe in nutty things. They have a right to be wrong. They have a right to be horrifically wrong. And they have a right to speak and say it. We're not them, right? If they don't agree with you, they want to silence you. They want to get Facebook to knock you off. They want to get Twitter to cancel you. We don't cancel people. Now, if there's going to be canceling going on, then it needs to be fair. I mean, why is the leader of Cuba allowed to continue to go on Twitter and incite violence against his own people? Twitter's let them on there. But I think that's the great thing about free speech is you get to see who everybody is, and ultimately we get to fight back and argue against them. But look, it's difficult, right? Because you know the atrocities and the abuses that are ongoing, and there are people that continue to fawn over the regime over there and do everything possible to either blame America or blame Cuban exiles. That's the other point, okay? Cuban Americans are probably the only ethnic group in America that it's politically correct to bash. The only ones that are politically correct to discriminate against. I think it's probably because Cuban Americans vote disproportionately Republican, whatever it may be. But I've seen signs that say deport Cuban American Republicans after the election last year. I've seen people openly basically parrot the line of the regime. But we're not claiming victimhood here. We don't want victimhood. We're proud to be Americans. I want to add one more point, and it's really interesting. The U.S. Olympic team has elected as one of its two flag bearers a Cuban American to carry that flag, the most recognizable symbol of liberty on the planet. Now, I don't know if it's because he's a double Olympian. He'd actually been a speed skater. Now he's a baseball player in the Olympics. But I hope it's because of the recent events. And what a powerful symbol that is to have a Cuban American, first generation, one generation removed from tyranny, carrying into those Olympic Games the most recognizable symbol of liberty and freedom on the planet. And the whole world's going to see it. And it's a very, very powerful thing.
Senator, one of the characteristics of the Biden administration seems to be very much they like to work with the international community, but they don't seem to like to talk to a lot of congressmen and senators. You're such a prominent voice on international relations, human rights, and specifically on Cuba and in Latin America. What's your level of interaction with the president, with the vice president, with the secretary of state on these crucial questions?
Well, near zero. So we wrote them a letter a week ago this Monday. They sent their legislative affairs team to our office on Tuesday. We told them we'd follow up with more specifics on our suggestions. We sent that to them on Wednesday. And I saw Secretary Blinken at an unrelated meeting, and we talked briefly about it there. That's it. That I've not heard from the president, haven't heard from the vice president, haven't heard directly from the Secretary of State or the National Security Council or anybody else on the topic. Frankly, I haven't even heard from the intelligence agencies to call me and sort of just weigh in on, and I'm the vice chairman of Intel. So I think, I'm not sure they're that interested in our opinion, but that's fine. We're going to keep giving it. And at the end of the day, it's not just my opinion, it's the opinion of millions of people across this country.
Do you have any idea what their policy is on Cuba? Is it just to be linked arms with the regime, or is there another policy? Because I can't ascertain what it is.
They don't have one yet, and they've admitted they're still under review, as they say it, and they have a very fundamental problem, and that is the person in charge of Cuba at the National Security Council and the person in charge of Cuba at the State Department are both supporters of the Obama engagement policies. And if it was up to them, and you know what their recommendations would be like in the infamous interagency internally, they're producing a memorandum about how this is an opportunity for us to lift limits on remittances, which, by the way, nothing to do with U.S. policy. It's the Cubans that insist that it has to come through some bank they set up in Panama so they can steal the money. They're talking about going back to the Obama era policies on this, that, and the other. They're a pro-engagement group. And I think that's being countered with the political people that are saying this is going to cost us big in Florida, X, Y, and Z, for political reasons and so forth. So it's not surprising that you have one day where Joe Biden comes out and says, communism's failed system, Marx socialism's failed. We're going to put internet access in Cuba. We're going to explore it. And then the next day, they come out with a statement saying, we just had a Zoom call with a bunch of Cuban American leaders, and we're going to be looking into what we can do to expand remittances on the island of Cuba. And of course, the reaction from people inside of Cuba involved in all this has been very swift and very brutal. Their argument is we are not in the street asking for remittances. The vast majority of the 11 million Cubans don't get any money from their relatives abroad. We're asking for liberty. How much clearer can they be when they're chanting liberty? I think that's what they mean.
Right. Yeah, in talking with Cuban Americans, they're all saying the time for action is now. They're demanding the Biden administration to take a stronger stance against the communist regime. But I really think something that's important is, why should Americans care of what's happening on the island?
Well, I would remind everybody geography is important. Cuba is literally 90 miles from our shores. So just from a geographic standpoint, whatever's happening there is going to impact our country, be it mass migration or the fact that the Russians collect intelligence against the United States from a satellite station they have there. The same with the Chinese that are present there. The Cubans are supportive of the Iranian regime. They're anti-Israeli. And they're anti-American. I mean, they are the reason behind a lot of the destabilization in Venezuela, what we're seeing now in Colombia, what we're seeing, some of the movements that have taken place in Peru, in Bolivia, in Nicaragua. So regionally, there also have long been anti-American troublemakers that try to undermine our national interest. So we have a national interest, I would argue a national security interest, in seeing freedom and democracy return to Cuba, both because it's so close and also because of the nefarious role they play in the region. Second, I think anytime there are people somewhere in the world that are saying, we don't want communism, we don't want Marxism, we want liberty, we should care about it. And especially when it's, one thing is halfway around the world and it matters. This is not Iraq or Afghanistan. This is literally 90 miles from our shores. And what happens in Cuba has always impacted America's economy, national security, and our well-being.
Senator, we have all these questions. CPAC recently joined this major class action lawsuit against these big tech companies. And then you have this question about people like President Trump can't have a Twitter site, but yet some of the most extreme, violent actors on the globe seem to have Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts in good standing. Does the regime in Cuba get treated with the red carpet on these platforms?
Yeah, as far as I know, there's not a single leader in that regime that has been, had a tweet pulled down or been censored or pulled down. The fake president of Cuba, and I say fake because he wasn't elected by anybody, they just put him there, went on Twitter and basically called for combat. He basically called on communists to take to the streets and attack people and hurt them. He did it on Twitter, and it's still there. The tweet is still there. So they've used Twitter as a way not just to spread disinformation, but to incite violence in his own country against his own people. As far as I can tell, there's been no action. I can tell you that entities like TikTok, which doesn't surprise me because they're owned by a Chinese company, have been pulling down images put up by Cubans on the island of the repression. They've been pulling those down and censoring those pretty good. So, again, this is a pretty good example of that hypocrisy and why this is untenable for them. If you're going to be in this position that you're going to be censoring and curating who can say what, then someone has to decide what's right and what's wrong. And once it's these companies, they want to be the gatekeepers to the public square. And it's an exorbitant amount of power to put in the hands of unelected, unaccountable people.
Just for our viewers, what are the 3 things that we need to be asking for, demanding from the Biden administration on Cuba, just as we wrap up?
Yeah, number 1 is do what you said. You said there's going to be this diplomatic surge. America's back. Well, why haven't they convened an emergency meeting of the Organization of American States? And at that meeting, gotten these other democracies to call on the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to go into Cuba and begin to document what's happened there. Why haven't they done that? Why haven't they taken it to the UN Security Council? They haven't done any diplomacy on it as far as we can see. Number 2 is internet access. Figure out a way, say as president, I am today asking the leading figures in business and politics to figure out a way to provide as many Cubans as possible free, unfettered access to the internet so they can communicate with the world and with each other. And number 3 is send a very strong message, publicly and privately, to the Cuban regime that you are not going to do not weaponize mass migration the way you did in 1980, the way you did in 1994. If you do that, we'll consider it a hostile action and we'll take appropriate measures. Those 3 things need to happen. They've done none of the 3 so far.
Well, we're with you 100% in this battle. Thank you for standing so stalwartly on the topic as you have for really decades. And we appreciate you being with us on CPAC Now, Senator.
Thank you both for covering this, obviously. Thank you.
And we'll be right back after this short break.
All right, well, welcome back to CPAC Now, America UnCanceled. That was a great interview with Marco. He just understands this issue so much. But Matt, I don't know if you realized, but in front of, they call it the Embassy of Cuba, which I will never, ever recognize it as the Embassy of Cuba in the United States of America, because there are a bunch of thugs who work there. They literally painted the Cuba Libre, not the communists,
the
but
protesters,
the protesters,
the freedom lovers,
painted the Cuba Libre right in front of the Cuba intersection, is what I'm going to call it. But the Department of Public Works came back and said the Cuba Libre painting on the street was unauthorized, and so they've asked to get it power washed to get it removed.
So the mayor of Washington, D.C., the leader in defunding the cops, who we've now seen an explosion of crime, most of that crime, unfortunately, the victims of it are people of color, who was all about painting Black Lives Matter right there at Lafayette Square, right by the Hay Adams Hotel and St. John's Church, which the protesters tried to burn down, remember, to the ground. They're fine with Black Lives Matter continuing to be painted on the streets. But imagine this, painting Cuba Libre is unacceptable.
Freedom.
It's so offensive to her that she's going to get it power washed off. She said it's because they didn't get a permit to have it painted. But the real reason is she's not for those African Cubans having freedom. She's for the opposite. She's for these policies that are keeping these people in chains. And we have to push this, because this is what socialism is about, right? It's in the end, it's not about tolerance or freedom or people having more staples.
You divide, you pick and choose, you only accept the people that believe in your ideology, in your thoughts, and clearly what we've seen with these progressives and these Democrats and these leftists is that they do really, really love these socialist policies and want to impose them on our country.
That's right. No, it's the truth. And it's a shame. And so, maybe there'll be a permit put in to paint
where
this.
I think we should ask to get it authorized. I think that's what CPAC's going to have to do. But let's quickly shift gears, Matt, because apparently what was he, an artist, an art critic of the New York Magazine, went after you on Twitter. He said to you in a response to an email tweet that you put out, Jerry Salt says, but you are a traitor and a grifter.
I don't know this word grifter. This is like, this is one of these Twitter words that's constant. I think that means I steal from people.
Oh, okay.
Something like that.
I hope you don't, because that could be problematic. But you just are like the happy warrior, because then you tweet at him saying, "Good morning, sunshine. I love America, her Constitution, and even the rights of you to say what you want, no matter how nasty."
That's right. So for this person is a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Right.
And he's a nasty person who, these socialists, the one thing about them, these radicals, is they're so mean and they're so unhappy.
Mean.
You don't bring a lot of people to your cause when you're unhappy. You usually bring people to your cause when you're filled with joy and you seem to be pleased with life. So poor guy, he's got his Pulitzer, but he's also got a really crappy attitude. Someone needs to take him out and teach him some manners. I think
Maybe
that would be
you need
nice.
to take him out to dinner or something and teach him some manners.
No, thank you.
Let's move quickly. I tweeted out that we know that this week marks the 6 months of Joe Biden as president. Can you believe it's been 6 months? It really does feel like it's been forever. And I tweeted out, longest 6 months ever.
You know what's interesting? He is like starting to do events. So his staff had him on lockdown. Like we can't let this man speak.
Right.
And now they're actually letting him have some events and stuff. It's very interesting to watch. It's like your toddler when they first taking their first couple of steps and they fall over and everything else. It's like the first couple steps of the presidency. After 6 months, they're letting him say and do things.
I think it's because Kamala auditioned for the role,
she did.
And she failed so badly. They're like, all right, let's roll out Joe. It's Joe's moment.
I loved it. Like she was the one who was like flying around doing events. And I read her schedule today. She's meeting with some people in the vice president's ceremonial office. That's not a real schedule, people.
No, it's not.
And I think it was like poll watchers.
Right.
It's like, okay, that is like, we can't trust the vice president not to put her foot in her mouth. So they're in a tough spot.
It's a trying time.
As I've said on Twitter, they got a president who needs cue cards and a vice president who has no clue cards. They're in a tough spot, this White House staff.
Well, we'll keep you posted on what's happening here in the swamp. Let me tell you, it is very interesting times, very chaotic times. Keep praying. That's all I can tell you. Keep praying, keep learning, keep fighting. That's what we need to do. But we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight on CPAC Now, America UnCanceled. We're having a ball doing this show, spending time with you on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And don't forget to watch the Bill Walton Show on Monday. We're going to continue expanding our programming because we've had such great success.
By the way, Bill had a great show on Monday. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, go back on the website, conservative.org, and pull it up. It is a fascinating conversation about the extent of woke capitalism. I'll just give you the money shot here. It's not just a problem with oligarchs in tech, where you have a handful of very, very wealthy leftists trying to destroy the country. Sadly, it's also true in big finance.
Yeah.
You have these companies that control massive amounts of the stock trades that occur and the equity that's owned, who have signed up completely on the woke agenda. And that's the reason why ExxonMobil had 3 radicals added to its board of directors. So you literally have people joining the board of directors of Exxon who don't believe in producing oil. This is not going to end well.
Yeah, it's not going to end well.
And we're creating chaos all over our economy. And I have a feeling like with most things, you and I are going to have the consequences, not the oligarchs.
Yeah. Well, I have a great idea. Let's have Bill Walton on the show and we can talk about it.
I'd like to do. That's a great idea.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.